So, hi Andy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Vicki. I am excited to be here.
Me too. Can we start with you, please give an introduction to yourself, your business, and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. So, my name is Andee Hart. I have been a full time entrepreneur for 2 years now, just a little over 2 years. Before that, I spent 17 years in corporate sales and leadership for two Fortune 500 companies and was fortunate enough to make the leap into entrepreneurship in 2023. And it all started with a candle company that I started in my kitchen during the pandemic. And so I still run that candle company. I wholesale my candles all over North America to boutiques. And I also coach women product entrepreneurs on how to sell and market their products in a way that doesn't feel icky because selling is hard sometimes. And so I took that corporate experience and now use that in my coaching business too.
Amazing. And I'm so excited to talk to you about all of this. And a bit later, I definitely want to come on to selling and your approach to
Yes.
selling and get your advice there because, as you say, it can feel a bit icky. It can feel a bit like a lot of people, despite having something to sell, kind of go, oh, but I don't want to be salesy. So we'll definitely come on
Yeah.
to that. What I'd like to start with first, if it's okay though, Andy, is so after 17 years in a corporate role, what made you decide to launch your product business and transition out of that?
Yeah. So probably like a lot of us, we're during the pandemic, we're quarantining at home. And I've always loved creating things. And so I remember one evening thinking, I want something to do after I'm done with my work. And so I kind of joked that it was my after work therapy. And I started making candles in my kitchen. And of course, my sales mind started running. And I thought, I was giving them away to friends and family and received really good feedback. So that was, without really thinking about it, that was my market validation right there, when I first started my business. But I put them at a local shop, a local general store, and it was really a consignment deal, which was great to start off with. But they started selling really well. But what I learned from that opportunity right there at the very beginning, they were not selling. But what I did is same candles, I just changed the branding. I changed the name of the candles. At the time, I lived in North Carolina. And so I just changed them to North Carolina names. And all of a sudden, they just sold like crazy, sold like wildfire. Well, then, of course, I started wholesaling my candles. And so that really just took off from there. And so, really, it just started from wanting to create and have something to do during the pandemic, which is kind of crazy that this all blossomed from there. But really just always had a desire for entrepreneurship. And so that just seemed like the perfect time to cultivate that dream.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of businesses did start around this time because
Yeah.
a lot of us, we might not have had more time, but we also, I mean, that's for some of us, maybe we had less time, but it was just, I completely relate to what you're saying about needing to do something else outside of work and being at home and just something for
Yeah.
yourself.
Right. I think it could have been for me. I know, I live by myself and it could have been a very, mentally taxing time if I did not have something productive to do. And so that was my after work therapy, just to put my mind to something and also to give other people joy during that time. Uh, I the tagline for my candle company, Hart Design Co, is heart for your home. And so that's truly what I was desiring to do, is just to give people some heart for their home in a time when everyone was quarantining at home. And so it really is a fun start to that company. And so it all blossomed from there.
Thank you. And so were you still working in your corporate role when you got started with Hart Design Co?
Yes, I was. And that's an interesting part of the story because I was still working in my corporate job and I actually got a promotion pretty soon after that into a sales director role. So I was overseeing a pretty big organization within my company after that. And this was after, we're all back to work. And so I had started wholesaling my company and my candles, and I had decided, um, if I could just get my candles in about 4 wholesale shops by the end of the year. I think this was like 2022, maybe. I get my years mixed up now. I think that's what the pandemic does to you, But I started just doing wholesale outreach and, still have my corporate job, but I'm doing that, after work. And I heard crickets at first. And so I'm not really thinking anything about it, but I'm just consistently, and that's what salespeople do, right? By month 3, I was in 120 shops. And I think people are going, that's amazing. And I was going, oh crap, because I still had my corporate job. And so I quickly pivoted and hired a sweet high school girl next door to help me, found an operations manager. But it was definitely a time when I had to stop taking orders. So I probably missed out on a lot of revenue because I did scale too fast and learned a lot of lessons, in the process. But yes, so that was still working full time and had to quickly hire some help or else I was not going to sleep at the time. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And so, what do you think? So, it sounds like you grew really, really quickly. What was it you think that made you grow quite so fast? What was it? Was it something you were doing, or was it circumstance, or a bit of everything?
Yeah. So I can without a doubt say it was the tenacity and the compound efforts of sending out those sales pitches because I love selling in person. That is something that I've always been taught. A lot of people don't. And so I think that this is a proof point that you don't have to sell in person to scale your business. This was the compound efforts of sending out pitch after pitch after pitch, multiple pitches a day. Because at the end of the day, it really is a math problem. The more sales pitches, retailer pitches that you're sending out, even if they're not perfect, and the more follow-ups that stay on top of, because 90% of people will never follow up after the first email. And so even though I didn't hear back for maybe 1 or 2 months, it wasn't the right timing. But eventually, by the 3rd month, it was all of that compound effort and the follow-ups that retailers were like, okay, I'm ready. The candles that I've been purchasing have sold through and I'm ready to make a purchase. And this company has been following up with me and I'm going to give them a try. That was literally what had happened. And I had stayed top of mind. I wasn't annoying, but I was the company that had stayed in front of them. And so that is just the compound efforts of what I had been doing. And so that's what I truly believe was successful.
Oh, you broke up there for a minute, Andee.
Uh-oh.
I'm not sure what happened. Um, I missed the last thing you said. You were talking about the benefits of following up, and then it went quiet.
Oh no.
And we're
Yeah,
obviously we're going to edit this bit. So if you don't mind
yeah,
repeating, and I'll just edit this out.
let me repeat that last part. So, what I was saying is, I truly believe that that was the compound efforts of me just putting my product out in front of people time and time again, and me staying in front of these retailers because they had started to sell through their current stock and inventory of candles. And so they were ready to give me a chance. And so even though maybe my first pitch, they weren't ready to purchase from me right then, but the fact that I had been the brand that stayed in front of them. And I mentioned that 90% of retailers will never follow up after their first pitch. And so you can just stand out by being in the top 10% by following up. And so that was what I did. I was not annoying. I just consistently stayed top of mind with these retailers. And that was the compound efforts of my hard work. And so now I don't have to send that many pitch emails to retailers anymore, which thank goodness, that's a lot of hard work. But I think that that's a lot of something that a lot of brands don't think about when they get into wholesale, because they think that the retailers are just going to come to them. But it is a lot of hard work at the beginning. But I definitely attribute the success to that.
I think so. I definitely can see that because it sounds like you were really tenacious, especially if you're not getting anything back. And I've had the same when I'm trying to, trying to do sell my services. Is that you can send emails and just hear nothing, 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 and then 6 months later, suddenly someone pops up, and because they need you now, and you
Yeah.
just hadn't been relevant at the time. But it's when you're getting nothing back, it's really hard, isn't it, to keep going and just to keep
Yeah.
the faith that all the work you're putting in will pay off.
Yeah. And it's important to remember, especially when you're selling, that when you hear no, it's not personal. It often just means not yet. And I have to, coming from 17 years in corporate sales, I knew that. But then when you start your own company and it's your own creations, it becomes a lot more personal.
Yeah.
And I had to relearn that, especially when I started my coaching business, because you're selling something totally different. It's not necessarily a product, but it's a service. And I think you have to even rewire your brain again, to really rethink, but it's the same concept. And so it's even good for me just repeating that now, because there are different types of buyers, and some buyers will be ready right when they first hear about your product offering, whatever that may be. And some buyers need time, and some buyers will buy a year later. And so it's really good to have that mindset, to be consistent and to stay the course.
That's really useful. Thank you. I think everyone does need to hear that because no's can feel really, really hard.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd also really like to ask Andy if you don't mind getting into the numbers, just to give an idea, because I think it's useful when you're talking about, these early days, you're sending out emails every day. What kind of volume are you sending? And I only ask that because I think it really helps make it clear to people what it is we need to be doing and the kind of effort we need to be making to start to see traction.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would send out anywhere from 10 to 20 a day. And it's important to remember that 10 to 20 new retailers a day. And there are great ways to find retailers. And I have a great course that teaches just an introductory challenge, a 5-day challenge that teaches you how to find and win retailers. But it's important to remember that once you start sending those pitches out, that you are also then spending time following up with those retailers. So maybe at first you start off by sending 20 pitches a day, but then the next week you start sending 10 pitches and you're sending follow-up emails. So I would say at minimum 10 a day when you're starting out.
That's so useful, thank you. And so for anyone listening who wants to start getting into retailers, where do they start? Is this it? Is it identifying retailers and sending emails, or is there something a step before that?
Well, so first, I would say make sure that you have a solid product line and you've really identified your niche. Because if you don't have a solid product line, you don't have, um, you know, really understanding who you serve, your ideal audience, and what the value is that you bring. And I'll give you a specific
Oh, we've
example.
cut out again, Andy, for some reason.
I don't know why I'm cutting out. I usually have great internet service.
Don't worry. I heard the first sentence, so just pick up from there. I'm just taking a note of the time, and I'll just get this all edited. It will be
Okay,
seamless. Don't worry.
let me fix my hair while my messy bun is kind of okay. So, um, the question that you had asked was,
What should somebody do before they start? And you were
yeah,
talking about having
yeah,
a great product line and a great
yeah,
niche, and So if we take it from after there,
Yeah.
that's perfect.
So before you start reaching out to retailers, it's important to make sure that you have a cohesive product line and you understand who your ideal audience is, and that you also have great product images. And I say this because you need to think about the fact that your retailers, they are not experiencing your product firsthand. They're experiencing it through visually through your product images and then also through your product descriptions. And so I don't necessarily think that you have to have a full on catalog or anything like that, but they're going to look at your website. And so they need to see beautiful, cohesive product images. And one of the things that I often see brands, and they might have um, candles, and then they have clothing, and then they have jewelry. I mean, just things that are all over the place. And so, really decide who you're going to serve and what products you are wholesaling, and stick with in your lane. It doesn't mean that you cannot expand later, or if you're in the home fragrance category, that you can't have multiple different products. But if you're all over the place and you don't have a cohesive brand and cohesive brand images, then what that tells the retailer is they don't really understand how to stage your products in their shop. They don't understand how to put your product collection together. And so they're just going to pass that right on by. And so that is something that I love to teach, just how to create a cohesive product collection. And so that's something that you need to have before you start pitching your retailers, because one of the great things that you can do when you pitch retailers is pitch a collection. And retailers love to have a ready collection. So I have a fresh home collection. I have a Parisian home collection, and that my Parisian home collection has different, like a French market, different um, candle scents that are all inspired by a trip that I took to Paris. And so I'll talk about that when I pitch that collection. So, and it just makes sense for a retailer to purchase all of those candles together. And so make it easy for retailers to do business for you and paint the picture for them.
That's really useful, thank you. And are there any other mistakes you see founders making when they approach retailers? Anything that comes up with the brands that you work with regularly that my listeners would appreciate knowing about?
Yeah, so I mentioned not having the cohesive brand, and trying to appeal to too many people. And I will reiterate that one because that's the biggest mistake that I see. And I had a business coach early on that told me the riches are in the niches. And I don't know if anyone else has heard that before. It's kind of a common phrase,
Yeah.
but I think that's so important to remember, because if you try to appeal to everyone, then you're going to appeal to no one. And so that is really number one. Number two is, and I mentioned this, but it's worth repeating, not having quality product images. And number three would be not selling where your retailers are. And by that, I mean, when you're wholesaling, one of the quickest things that I learned was I need to be where my wholesalers are, and that's on Fair. And so Fair, for your listeners, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, but that's like the Etsy for wholesalers. And so I quickly got on there and learned how to optimize my visibility. And that's an ongoing process. But, since the pandemic, Fair has just grown and grown. And a lot of retailers are not going to the trade shows anymore. They're just doing all of their buying online. And so that is not a place that I put all of my eggs in the Fair basket. I don't recommend that. But, I have a way for them to purchase wholesale directly on my website too. But if I'm not on Fair, then a lot of new retailers don't have a way to find me, and a lot of them prefer to shop on Fair. So I need to make it easy for my retailers to do business with me, and a lot of times that is on Fair.
That makes a lot of sense, thank you. And I've heard about Fair. In fact, I've had an episode on here specifically about Fair because it is such a growing platform. And as you
Yes.
say, if that's where people want to buy, and I think there's possibly for retailers, particularly smaller ones, a bit of peace of mind of buying via a platform like Faire, where they perhaps feel it's less of a risk than buying from someone's website, say, that they've never heard
Yeah.
of, they haven't seen the products. I think so. I can understand, with the fees, the reasons why people might not want to be on a platform like Faire. But as you say, if that's where the buyers are, you kind of have to go to them, or you're going to miss out on a percentage of buyers.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a great resource for me, but there are some things that you need to do to gain visibility on Fair, and so you kind of have to play their roles. But even if you hired a sales rep, a road rep, you're going to pay them 20%. And so, coming from a sales background, I get that. It's just but a lot of brands don't. They're like, I don't want that 15% taken out. Hire a sales rep, you're going to have that. And so I just consider it as fair as kind of like a sales rep for my company.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. That's a nice way of framing it, actually, because
Yeah.
yeah, I've heard the same, that there are obviously fees involved, whereas if you went directly to retailers, there aren't. However, as you say, I'm sure it gives you a bigger pool of retailers, because there will be
Yeah.
those that are just looking on Fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've heard you talk before, Andy, about building genuine relationships with your buyers. So what does that look like in practice, and how do you build and then maintain these relationships?
Yes, I love this question. And it's, obviously not every one of your retailers are you going to be able to build a personal, connection with, but you're going to have those retailers that reach out and have questions or have specific needs. But I'll speak to it first from a general perspective. So I have um, you can either do this on Google Drive or on Dropbox, but just a link to product images that my retailers can use on their social media. And I provide, just social media hooks or captions about my products that they don't have to write, and they're free to use them on any of their social platforms or any of their emails or on their website. I provide my logo. I'll provide shelf talkers for them to educate their customers on my products. So simple things like that to help them sell more of my products. And so I also provide testers for my products, because they're candles. Some of my candles you can't smell through the packaging, and so anything I can do to help my retailers sell, because their success is my success. So that's a general sense where I'm maybe not connecting with them at a personal level, but I'm still helping them sell, and they have access to that. On a more personal level, I'll give you a specific example of one of my retailers. And this naturally has become a larger retailer of mine. She had reached out and she wanted a white label candle. White label, obviously meaning her branding on it. She wanted a custom scent for her shop. And so we developed that, and she loved it, ended up coming back, and she had bought these beautiful teacups for her shop, and she could not sell them because she also had custom coffee. And so she wasn't even, she was just talking to me about it. And I said, what if we made those into candles? She can't keep them on the shelf now. So just simple stuff like that, collaborating with your retailers and bringing fun ideas to life for them, and just talking about what struggles they're having when you are talking with them on the phone or in person or whatever that looks like. And you have a solution that can help them. That is obviously, you're not going to have that with every retailer, but that is what a true partnership can look like. And that's where your creative side can come out and you can really have fun. And so that's been one of my really fun partnerships. And been able to do white label and private label um, designs for a lot of my retailers. And I have fun just getting, the creative side and putting their logo on my candles. It's really fun. to see that out there and to see some of my candles in some, bigger shops with their logo on it, and just work with them. And so I get a lot of satisfaction out of that.
Oh, I really like that. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that example. That's a really nice one. And I think it shows that you can be quite creative with how you work with your stockists as well. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah, I think that's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And it, still gets me in on the creative side and, problem solving. So it's fun.
And actually, I hadn't planned to ask this before we come back to the sales. As you were talking, I was thinking, how are you managing sort of the creation of your candles and the actual production of your candles versus all of the selling and maintaining relationships with your existing stockists and looking for
Yeah.
more? Because that's a lot.
Yeah. So I just recently moved to Arkansas to be closer to family. So before I did that, I had an operations manager that did all of the production and creation. And that was such a blessing. Since I moved, I do have a couple of people that work for me. And so they do really, I would say, 90% of the production, kind of brought them up to speed and fulfillment. And so I really am a lot more hands off on that. I still do a lot of the creation, but if I retire a scent, then or excuse me, I should say reverse that. If I introduce a new fragrance, then I will always retire a scent. So I keep my product portfolio pretty tight. And, I'm constantly evaluating my sales data and profit margins. So if there's a bottom performer, I'm going to retire that fragrance. So what that does for myself and the people that work with me, it means that, we're not having to produce 50 different fragrances. We have our core fragrances that are our constant bestsellers. And then after the holidays, our holiday fragrances will drop off naturally. And we have some limited editions that we'll bring out for Valentine's Day, and then those will go away. And so we do our products and our fragrances very strategically in that way, so that we're not constantly producing a lot of fragrances at once. And that really helps with production and fulfillment. And so I think that is something that we've done really smart from the beginning. And we also only do 2 vessels. We have a wooden dough bowl and we have a 4-ounce travel tin. So this is one of my holiday tins. It actually, it's a limited edition. It says resting. I don't know if you can see it. Resting
Yeah, I
Grinch
can see
face.
that.
We have just some labels that we switched out. This is actually one of my best sellers this holiday. It says Wreck the Halls. So I just designed these labels and switched them out. So these are new this year, but same fragrance that I've always had. And so, but we've always just had these 4-ounce travel tins that are great for point of purchase. And then our signature reusable dough bowls. And so that's been another thing that's been really helpful in just managing the whole production process. We don't get crazy with how many products that we have.
Thank you for explaining that. And I really like how simple you've kept things. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I love your advice as well about retiring a fragrance when you bring
Yes.
in a new one, because I think it can be really, really hard. And I speak from experience. I used to have my own brand years ago. It can be really hard to retire something, even if it's not doing as well as the others, even
Yeah.
though the numbers might say it makes sense, it can still be hard because it's kind of your thing, you've created it.
Yeah.
So I think that having that policy, you explained like a one in, one out policy, makes a lot of sense because I guess the decision's been made for you. That's how you operate. And you know
Yeah.
when you introduce something new, something has to go. I really like that.
And then inevitably when you announce that it's retiring and last call for that product, people come out of the woodwork and they're like, "Don't retire this." And you start second guessing it. But I tell my clients all the time, don't second guess it. The data doesn't lie. And just because people are coming out of the woodwork because you announced it's retiring, don't second guess it. That's the point of announcing it's retiring. So it happens every single time I see it. So, and it happens in my own product line, but yeah, it always makes me laugh.
It's that scarcity thing, isn't it? As soon as, and I've done
Yes.
it myself. I've shopped at brands before, and they say something's going away, and I'm like, oh, I must stock up on that
Right.
because it's going away, and it might be something you've never bought before, but you're like, oh, I can't buy it ever again,
Yeah.
so I better buy it now.
Right. Yeah. But that's the whole point of retiring it because you're not going to bring it back. So, yeah.
Oh, that's also interesting.
Yeah.
So, Andy, I've seen that you describe your approach as countercultural sales. What does that mean to you, and how's that different from traditional selling?
Yes. So, being in corporate America and technology sales, I have been through probably every sales methodology training that there is on the market. And often we see out there, and I don't know about you, but I get Facebook and social ads all the time for different sales trainings, and they're usually some guy that's getting in their like Ferrari or something and telling me about how you overcome every objection and this sales training. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's to me my target audience and the type of that's not what made me successful in corporate America. And I also truly believe that everyone, no matter who you are, God gave you a personality for a reason. And some of the best salespeople that I have ever met have been introverts, believe it or not. And it's because they were able to truly connect with people. They were able to stop and listen long enough to really hear what the customer wanted and needed. And so I have always said that, often my clients have and I'm sure your listeners, they have an aversion to selling because their experience with sales, they've had probably a negative experience because what they were sold at some point, and after they were sold it didn't live up to what they were told, right? There was a delta between what the salesperson said was going to happen or what they were told about the product and what actually happened. And so that's what creates this, you know, bad experience and bad mindset that sales has for us. And we've all had those experiences. And so culturally, we're all told in sales trainings, overcome every objection, and don't take no and, fill in the blank. But what would happen if you took on the mindset that not every person you talk to is your customer and you actually valued the customer over making the sale? And so by that, and I'll give you a specific example. Um, when you think about the fact that not every person is your customer but you're trying to overcome every objection, when you do that, you actually end up spending more time and headache and effort on the back end because you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and you have customer satisfaction issues, they're frustrated, right? And so on the back end, you're just spending more time with them. So I had a customer and they were actually really wanting to buy my wholesale course. This was a little over a year ago. And we were on a call. Usually they'll do a discovery call with me. And she said, I'm ready to buy. And as we were talking about her goals for her product business, it became clear that wholesale wasn't actually what she wanted to achieve. And I told her, I'm happy to help serve you in this way, but I don't think my wholesale course is going to accomplish what you want to do. And I have someone else that could help serve you. And so I pointed her to another coach. And at the end of the call, she was like, wow, okay. She went on to work with that other coach. And a year later, she came back and she ended up buying my wholesale course because she said, I'm ready to step into wholesale now. Not only did she buy my wholesale course, but she had recommended 2 other people. And so what that did is it served her best in what her goals were because I listened to her, and it created a trust with her. And so had I tried to force that at the time, then it I would have been doing a lot more work on the back end. It would have been frustrating for me too. And so that's just a prime example. I think, culturally, we would have just sold it to her and moved on, right? But countercultural, we sell things in a way that align with our values, and even when it means saying no to the customer, which is hard to do. It's hard, but it's
Oh,
also the right thing to do.
absolutely. I'm so with you with that. So my sort of day business is I work with brands to sell their products on Amazon, and I will quite regularly speak to people and either tell them that they're not ready or their product isn't a good fit, or maybe the market's way too saturated at that time or whatever it might be. But I will sometimes, like you say, turn people away in the nicest possible way because I don't think that working with me is in their best interest or isn't right for them at that time. And I agree with you that I feel like by doing that, first of all, you keep your integrity because you're not just about taking someone's money. Because I think if you really want to see the person you're working with succeed, then you put their interests first. And I think that really helps for
Absolutely.
people to trust you because they know you're not just trying to convince them of, you could have very easily said, no, 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 you need to be in all these stores and wholesale's the way to go. But if that wasn't right for her at that time, then, you know, if it's not right, it's not right. And I really
Right.
like that example because I think it doesn't feel good for anybody if someone's pushed into making a sale that isn't right for them because you wouldn't feel good about it and they wouldn't feel
Right.
good about it. So no one wins.
Well, and then you just perpetuate this icky sales culture, and that is not what I want to be about. That's not what I want my brand to be about. And so, um, yeah, that's why I talk about, she sells differently. That's what my coaching brand is, because I want to do things differently.
I really like that. Let's talk a little bit about pricing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I know something I've seen you say, I've done my research, Andy, and something I've seen that you said is that lowering your price doesn't always mean you'll make more sales. Can you talk a
Yes.
little bit about that? Because I think that's a really interesting thing to discuss.
Yes. So I think often we race to the bottom, trying to compete with other people. And so what that does, it trains your customers to expect a sale from you. And I have been guilty of this before. I have absolutely been guilty of this before. But I want you to think about your favorite clothing brand. I know there's some here in the States, like Ann Taylor or, fill in the blank. I never buy from them when they are not on sale because they've trained me that they're always going to have a sale. And so I'll wait it out. And so that's exactly what you want to avoid as a brand, unless you want to be known for that. You can do that. That can be your strategy. But buyer psychology, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize. It's something interesting with the human mind. But I'll give you a specific example. This is a true story, a true case study that we studied in one of my MBA classes. And it was about some boutiques in a small town out west. All of these boutiques sold this beautiful turquoise jewelry. So if you've ever visited any, Western towns like out in Wyoming, things like that, they sell beautiful turquoise jewelry. This one boutique, though, they kept on lowering their price to try to beat the next retailer over, and they could not sell. They could not sell any of their jewelry. Well, they had a lot of inventory. So they ended up talking to a consultant about it. How do we get our inventory moving? And he said one thing: raise your prices 10x what they currently are and remove that sale sign. They sold out in 1 weekend. 1 weekend. It's buyer psychology that when we see a higher price, we associate higher quality. And so when you are constantly lowering your price, your buyer is thinking that's lower quality than your competitor. And so it's important to remember that. And there are things that you can do to simple things that you can do to elevate your brand and your product. And a lot of that is it's not about your product, it's about your branding, it's about your packaging. And, and here's a perfect example. My dough bowl candles, when I first started out, I didn't have any cellophane wrap on them to protect them for shelf life. I just had twine on them and a simple label. And I noticed all of my competitors were kind of doing the same thing and selling them for 36 US dollars. And I thought, how can I stand out and what's valuable to my retailers? Shelf life and giftability. That's what my retailers were telling me. So I started wrapping them in cellophane to keep shelf life. And then I put a big, bright, decorative ribbon and a gift label on them. I moved them from $36 MSRP to 48, and they are selling like hotcakes. So just taking them and investing, an extra 75 cents in cost, move them up $12 in retail price, and they're selling considerably more than competitors. So that's just a simple thing with packaging that made it a lot more valuable to retailers, that they're willing to pay that much more for products. So things like that, that you really need to be aware of what is valuable to your retailers, that you can charge more, and make more profit for your business.
That's a brilliant example. Thank you for that. And I'm with you because competing on price, I don't think anyone wins. It's something I see often, with as I say, I work predominantly on Amazon. Is that someone will in a certain category, someone might lower their price, or they'll either have a sale or they'll put their price down, and then everyone else thinks, oh, now that product's suddenly $10 cheaper than mine, so
Mm-hmm.
I better put my price down. And
Right.
then the next person does that. And so something I'm always saying to my clients is, no, the price is the price. Yes, you can have sales at certain, there might be times of year where you want to, like, we've got Black Friday coming up as we record. Sometimes people want to leave a discount. I don't think there's anything wrong with discounting. But like you say, it's like when it becomes just who can be the cheapest, it's just a race to the bottom, because I don't think anyone wins.
Yeah. No one does. And it really not many people study the buyer psychology, the consumer mindset piece of it. But when you really stop and think about why you buy something, when you're making a purchase, even if it's just simple, something simple, it really opens your eyes. And so, yeah, it's very, very interesting.
I think so. And and I'm sure you're the same, I've definitely paid, when I'm looking at comparable products, I've definitely paid slightly more for something that's got a feature or a benefit that I want, or it's got like loads of amazing reviews or a certain ingredient. There's definitely, if I can see a reason, if I can look at two products side by side and say, I can see why this one's slightly more expensive, I'm more than happy to pay the difference. If they're like
Yeah.
identical, then
Yeah.
it's different, because then you're going, okay, why? But I think if your product's got a US, like you were saying with yours, with the gift tag and having a lovely bow, I can definitely see that a customer would go, okay, I can see why this is of higher value, and they'd be happy to pay it. I think as long as the value is obvious, customers are generally happy to pay more.
Yeah. And I think that is part of what is interesting, is sometimes it is not just your product, it is the packaging piece of it, and your branding, and then even sometimes your product images if you're e-commerce. So there's so much more that goes into elevating your product and your product price than just your product itself.
Thank you. So let's say someone's listening and they're going through maybe a slow sales time, maybe customers aren't buying. How do you figure out whether the issue is with your pricing, with your positioning, with something else entirely? How do you kind of get to the root cause of what's going on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Well, first, I would take a look at your data. Usually data doesn't lie. And so if you are um, looking at, a lot of times customers don't want to show you, their financials, because financials can bring shame sometimes. But the more that you address them, the more that you can stop running an expensive hobby and start building a business that actually pays you. And so a lot of times it is just taking a look at the data and realizing that your pricing is just off and you're pricing wrong for your market, or you're marketing to the wrong audience, right? You're marketing, you're not where your audience is. And so I see a lot of people, a lot of clients that are doing a lot on social media, but they're not doing anything to grow their email list or market to the clients that have already bought from them. And so that's a huge one, because I think social media is just easy. But a lot of times when I first dive in, that's the first thing that's missing is a solid marketing plan that's actually sustainable outside of social media. You know, not that there's anything wrong with social media, but really building an email list and, you know, nurturing your buyers that are already there. And so when you look at the data, I always look at how many of people that have bought from you are returning and buying again. And what is the customer lifetime value? Those are two metrics that actually provide substance to me. And then obviously your profit margin. So, you know, I can hear a business say all the time, I'm a six-figure business. Well, that's great, but is your operating expenses 95% of that? Because that means nothing. I'd rather be a $50,000 business and have 50% operating margin than the reverse. And so, um, I really take a look at the data, and then that's where I start diving in with a strategy. Do we need to work on pricing? Is it the profit margins that are struggling, or is it maybe your marketing where you're not bringing back customers that have already purchased from you, and your customer retention rate is not there? And so that's where you really want to take a look at those substance metrics and see where you're missing in your business, your product funnel, I should say, your sales funnel. So there's a lot of champagne metrics out there, like revenue and things like that. But you really want to look at the substance of it, instead of just the things that people tout, like how many social media followers they have and how much revenue they brought in last year. So that's where I always start.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
thank you so much for everything you've shared and the time you've given us. Have you got time for two more questions, Andee, before we finish
Absolutely.
up? Oh,
Absolutely.
brilliant. Brilliant, because I know we've been recording a while, but there's two more things I'd really love to ask you. The first is, so for anyone who's listening who thinks, okay, I'm going to start, approaching stockists, I'm going to start selling, but maybe is feeling a bit nervous.
Yeah.
What's one small thing they could do right now as they listen to this podcast to help get going and maybe build a bit of confidence?
Yes, I love this one because the reality is we're selling every day. But I always say this, selling is not something that you just master overnight, and you're a lifetime learner of the art of selling. And so think of it like going into a gym and you are hopping on a treadmill and you're exercising those muscles. Um, it takes 10 seconds of courage to put yourself out there. And so I want you to think about the fact that you can do anything for 10 seconds. You can type that email and hit send. You can walk into a store and talk to the owner about your products. You can do anything for 10 seconds. So I always just reiterate, it takes 10 seconds of courage to put your product out there or to sell your product. And even if you feel like you flopped, you probably didn't. Even if you feel like you flopped, you did it. And that's a win. You talked about your product, and that's a win. And when you have a product or a service or whatever it is, if you have something that brings value to the world, brings value to other people, then you actually owe it to them to share about it. You owe it to them to share about it. You don't keep those things to yourself. And so when you truly believe in your product offering, share it. 10 seconds of courage.
I love that. Thank you, Andee. And now my very final question, I promise. What is your number one piece of advice for other product brands?
Number one piece of advice: don't give up. This came from my brother, who is one of the most amazing entrepreneurs I know. Started a construction company right out of college and has grown it amazing. And I remember when I became an entrepreneur 2 years ago, he sat across the lunch table from me, my older brother, and he said, Andee, don't give up. Don't give up. And the thing about being an entrepreneur, as you know, is there are days where you feel like you're on an island and you are just questioning what you're doing, and you're thinking, is my product good enough? Am I good enough? Don't give up. And especially when it comes to sales, when you put your product out there, your messaging is not always going to hit. It's just a matter of time until it does. And so just continue to refine your approach and continue to put your product out there, because there is one thing that sets apart the successful entrepreneurs, and it's the fact that they were tenacious. They did not give up. And so that would be my piece of advice that I need to be reminded of too.
I think we all need to be reminded of
Yes.
that. Oh, thank you so much, Andee. I absolutely love this. Thank you so, so much for all you've
Yay. Thanks
shared.
for having me.
I'm going to have all the links in the show notes so people can come and find both your candle brand and your consultancy as well. And thank you again so much.
Thanks for having me, Vicki. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.